The Imperial High Command stood in silence as the message flickered to life across the Grand Command Center's massive holoscreens. It was a transmission from an unknown source, intercepted and decrypted at the farthest reaches of the galaxy. The last words of the transmission echoed ominously, reverberating through the room. War with humanity will end in disaster. Your empire is blind, and your arrogance will be your undoing. The officers exchanged nervous glances. Such dire warnings were nothing new in the galaxy, but the intensity of this one sent a ripple of unease through the heart of the Imperial forces. For a moment, the room felt suffocating, the quiet before the storm. No one spoke. The holographic figure of the alien general, his features rigid with authority and marked by age and regret, stood at the center of the transmission, his form flickering like a ghost. "This general is exiled," one of the commanders muttered, his voice breaking the silence. "Why should we listen to the rantings of a traitor?" But the leader of the High Command, Grand Admiral Koran, did not immediately dismiss the message. Instead, his piercing gaze remained fixed on the figure of the general, who had once been a trusted officer in the Galactic Empire's greatest military campaigns. The general had fought in the early wars, commanded fleets that decimated countless civilizations. His sudden exile had been a mystery to all, but the words he spoke now felt different. Weighted, urgent. The general's image flickered once again, and his voice grew sharper, the cold reality of his warning sinking into the room's oppressive atmosphere. "You cannot crush them. They are unlike anything you have faced. The humans are a force you do not understand. Your fleets will fall. Your arrogance will be your end. And when it happens, it will be too late." Koran leaned forward, his fingers steepling as he studied the hologram. The general had been known for his cold precision and unwavering loyalty before his sudden fall from grace. The truth of his words was impossible to ignore. Humanity had never been taken seriously by the Galactic Empire. The Empire had seen Earth as a primitive backwater, ripe for conquest. For centuries, human technology had lagged behind, and their species had always seemed too disorganized and fragmented to pose a real threat. Yet, the general's warning implied something far more dangerous. He spoke of a shift, something fundamental about humanity that even the Empire had failed to recognize. The general had made no attempt to hide his disdain for the Empire's approach, but this warning was not born of bitterness. It was born of fear. Can we trace the origin of this message? Koran's voice cut through the tense silence. He needed to know where this warning had come from, and why it had been sent now. An officer at the far side of the room worked quickly, tapping commands into his console. A few moments later, the officer reported, "The message originated from the Outer Rim. Sir, an uninhabited system. There's nothing of interest there. No reason for anyone to send a message from that region. It's as if someone is trying to warn us without any direct motive." Another officer, more skeptical, spoke up. "Perhaps it's a trap, a deliberate attempt to sow fear. The humans could be trying to manipulate us, playing on our concerns." But Koran's eyes were narrowed, his focus unwavering. The words from the transmission continued to replay in his mind. "Your arrogance will be your undoing." It was a quiet certainty in the general's voice that unsettled him. The galaxy had underestimated humanity for too long, and now that underestimation might cost them dearly. The general's final words echoed through the room. "I am the last warning you will get. Make no mistake, the humans will come for you. And when they do, they will not stop until you are destroyed." As the transmission ended, the room fell into an uneasy silence. Koran stared at the empty space where the hologram had once stood. The general's warning had been clear. The Empire was on the verge of something catastrophic. But what could they do? The Empire's military might was unmatched across the stars. Their fleet could obliterate entire systems in an instant. Surely, no species, especially one as primitive as humanity, could pose a real threat. Yet doubt lingered in Koran's mind. With a deliberate calm, he finally spoke, his voice low but firm. "Prepare the fleet. We will investigate this threat. If humanity is truly as dangerous as this traitor claims, we will meet it head on." And so, the wheels of fate began to turn. The Empire, long undefeated and unchallenged, was about to encounter a force more unpredictable and far more deadly than it could ever have imagined. The first wave of humanity's warships appeared on the edge of Imperial space without warning. No advance notice. No diplomatic plea. Just an unrelenting surge of sleek, formidable vessels that glowed with an intensity that could only mean one thing: war. The Empire's advanced surveillance systems had detected nothing, and their response time had been too slow. Now they were facing the unthinkable. Humanity was coming for them, and they were armed to the teeth. Grand Admiral Kuran had seen many things in his time: battles that spanned star systems, fleets that could decimate entire civilizations, and weapons that made the very fabric of space tremble. But nothing could have prepared him for what was unfolding before his eyes. A fleet of human warships, no larger than a single Imperial battle group, had entered Imperial space with astonishing precision. They moved in tight formation, perfectly coordinated, as if they had always been a part of the Empire's own military ranks. Kuran's command bridge buzzed with activity as his officers scrambled to assess the situation, but the images on their screens were already making one thing clear. Humanity had something they hadn't expected: a level of discipline, strategy, and military innovation that rivaled even the Empire's best. "Report," Kuran ordered, his voice steady despite the mounting tension. "We've just intercepted communications from the human fleet, sir," his communications officer said. "It's strange, they're not demanding surrender. No, they're issuing a challenge." Challenge. Kuran's brow furrowed. A challenge to what? The might of the Galactic Empire? Ridiculous. The officer's fingers hovered over the console, uncertain. "They've simply stated, 'This is your first warning. We are coming for you.' No threats. No declarations of war, but the tone is unmistakable. They're prepared for conflict." Kuran exhaled sharply, leaning forward in his command chair, trying to absorb the magnitude of what he was hearing. Humanity had shown no signs of developing into a serious galactic threat. Their technology had always been lagging, their economy unstable, their military mostly confined to their own world. But now, a fleet of warships, sleek and powerful, had somehow appeared on their doorstep, prepared for battle. It was as if they had leapt from their primitive beginnings into something far beyond what anyone had expected. The ships were unlike anything Kuran had ever seen. While their designs were simple in comparison to the advanced, ornate warships of the Empire, there was an elegance to their functionality. Each ship seemed to maximize its potential: minimal waste, maximum efficiency. And their weapons? The reports from the scouts indicated something horrifying. The human ship's primary weapons had the power to obliterate entire fleets with a single shot. This wasn't just a minor skirmish, this was the real thing. "How did they develop this technology so quickly?" one of Kuran's officers asked, disbelief in his voice. "We have no answer for that," Kuran replied, his mind racing. Humanity's rise to this level of technological prowess didn't make sense. How could they have bridged the vast gap between their past and the present in such a short period? He couldn't fathom the speed with which they'd advanced. The general's warning had been clear, but Kuran had dismissed it as paranoia. Now, the truth of it slammed into him with the force of a supernova. Humanity was more dangerous than anyone had realized. Kuran's fingers tapped a rhythmic pattern on the armrest of his chair. He knew what he had to do, but the strategy required something more than brute force. It would require an understanding of humanity that the Empire had never considered. The humans were relentless and resourceful. This would not be a battle of pure firepower alone. It would be a battle of tactics, of adaptation, and, above all, of survival. "We need to learn more about them," Kuran said, his voice low. This is no ordinary force. Send out reconnaissance units. I want to know everything: how they fight, how they think, and how they built these weapons so quickly." The Empire's response was swift, but it would be too late. Within hours, humanity's warships began to spread out across the sector, engaging the smaller outlying Imperial colonies. The Empire's fleets, vast and powerful though they were, could not mobilize fast enough to counter the precision and speed of the human assault. Within days, a network of Imperial defense stations was disabled, entire civilian fleets vaporized in a blink, and human warships kept pushing deeper into Imperial space. The scale of the assault was unnerving. The human warships weren't just aiming for military targets, they were hitting strategic hubs, power stations, and supply depots. They weren't fighting like invaders. They were fighting like they had been preparing for this moment their entire lives. The Empire had assumed humanity was too scattered, too divided to ever present a real threat. But now, they were seeing the true depth of humanity's will to fight. This is not just about power, Koran muttered to himself. They're outthinking us. They're planning ahead, anticipating every move we make. He watched the screen in disbelief as human forces began to strike the Imperial supply routes that spanned the galaxy, disrupting everything. The Empire's vast fleet was already stretched thin with other conflicts, and now, with humanity's unexpected push, their resources were quickly running dry. Koran's fingers clenched into fists, a rare emotion bubbling to the surface. Fear. Fear of something that the Empire had never faced before, something unpredictable, something too wild to be contained. The Empire had made countless mistakes in underestimating other species. Now humanity's challenge was clear. They weren't coming to be conquered. They were coming to destroy the Empire's very way of life. And if Koran didn't act swiftly, he knew the Empire would fall. It was no longer a matter of if humanity would defeat them. It was a matter of how long the Empire could last. It was the sound of an old war veteran's voice that cut through the tension, not the warning of an enemy fleet or the roar of gunfire, but the quiet, unwavering truth of a man who had seen the Empire's mistakes firsthand. The alien general stood before the Empire's leadership once again, his hologram flickering with age, but not with the regret he carried. The time for warnings had passed. This was a confession. Grand Admiral Koran leaned forward, his face set in a hard line. Before him, the image of the alien general appeared once more. The general was a figure of legend, once an esteemed officer in the Imperial military, commanding vast fleets against enemy species. But now he was in exile, a man who had fled his post after an incident that left the Empire's leadership both furious and wary. Koran's mind raced. The general's warnings had been eerie, too accurate, and too late. Yet there was something more, something that needed to be understood. You wanted us to listen. Koran's voice was sharp. Now speak plainly. Why should we trust the words of a traitor? The general's features were worn and tired, his eyes reflecting a deep sorrow that Koran had not expected. Trust is earned, Admiral, the general replied, his voice low, almost solemn. And I earned mine when I fought beside you. But I made a mistake. I trusted your arrogance too, and look where it has brought us. Koran's fists clenched. He had not expected this. A confession was not what he had expected from this exile. What do you mean by arrogance? The general's hologram flickered, and the room seemed to grow colder. You believed your fleet could outgun anything in the galaxy. You believed your technology would save you. But the humans, they are not what you think. There was a long pause, as if the weight of his own words had settled heavily on the general's shoulders. I was sent to Earth as part of a mission to eliminate their military forces. I expected a primitive, disorganized society, unfit for the stars. But what I found was an endless well of resources, innovation, and above all resolve. Koran listened intently, his thoughts swirling. Could it be true? Had the humans really grown so powerful so quickly? The general continued, his voice growing colder, more detached. Humanity is not bound by the same limits as other species. You see them as weak because you view them through the lens of your own superiority. You don't understand what drives them. They will not stop fighting, not because they can't be beaten, but because they believe they can win. And that makes them dangerous. Koran's eyes narrowed. He had heard such warnings before. Many races had tried to break the Empire's resolve by claiming that the species they faced were more formidable than they seemed. But the Empire had crushed them all. So why was this different? Why did you leave? Why warn us now? Koran asked, voice steady but laced with suspicion. The general's gaze hardened, and he looked away for a moment, as if recalling the moment that had changed everything. Because I saw the truth. I saw how the humans adapt, how they never stop learning. I saw their potential when they fought back against me and my fleet against us. The Empire's methods are outdated. Your technology, while impressive, is vulnerable to their ingenuity. You are blind to what they can become. Koran's jaw tightened. He had fought many battles, led countless campaigns, and seen empires fall. But the idea that the humans were capable of something so devastating felt impossible to reconcile with what he had known. You're telling me they can match us, even defeat us? Koran's voice grew quieter, but the implications were undeniable. The general nodded solemnly. They have already begun. Your fleets will falter, your defenses will crumble, and by the time you realize what's happening, it will be too late. They will outthink you, outfight you, and eventually outlast you. The room fell silent. Koran's mind raced, weighing the general's words against his years of experience. Could it be true? Was the Empire's technology, its fleets, its centuries of dominance about to be undone by a species that had only recently discovered space travel? For the first time in his career, Koran felt the ground beneath him shift. He had seen the humans fight. He had seen their tactical brilliance. But he had also seen their desperation, an unstoppable drive that could only be matched by the greatest of warriors. The general's final words were heavy. You've been warned. The humans will come. And when they do, they will not stop. Koran stared at the fading hologram, his mind heavy with doubt. It was no longer a matter of if humanity would rise. It was a matter of when. And now, the question was no longer whether the Empire could defeat them, but whether it could survive them. The stench of failure hung in the air as Koran stood in the war room, staring at the vast holographic map of the galaxy. The Imperial fleets, once undefeated, were now spread thin, barely holding their ground against humanity's relentless advance. Koran's mind raced, his options were dwindling, and soon there would be no choice but to embrace the one solution he had hoped to avoid, an alliance with the very general whose warnings he had dismissed as paranoia. The door to the war room hissed open, and the exiled general, a figure of authority in the Empire's darkest days, stepped in. His expression was grim, the weight of his knowledge pressing down on him like a physical burden. Behind him, a small group of his loyal followers, former military officers who had defected with him, entered quietly, eyes scanning the room for signs of hostility. Admiral, the general began, his voice low but resolute, we are out of time. The humans are pressing forward faster than I predicted. They are adapting to your tactics, anticipating your every move. If you want to survive, we need to think differently together. Koran didn't reply at first. He had resisted the general's calls for an alliance for weeks, stubbornly holding on to the idea that the Empire could handle the human threat on its own. But now, as Imperial outposts fell one after another, he could no longer deny the reality that was unfolding before him. Humanity had already crossed a line, and the Empire was struggling to keep up. We'll need more than just your tactics, Koran finally spoke, his voice hard, betraying none of the desperation he felt. We need access to their technology, their weapons. Your defection might have given you insight into their methods, but you were never one of them. You've seen nothing of what they've developed since you left. The general's eyes flickered with something close to regret, but he didn't flinch. You are right. I don't know their technology, not in full, but I know their thinking. I know how they adapt, how they learn. And that, Admiral, is something the Empire has never understood. Humanity's strength is not in its weapons. It is in its resolve. Koran was silent for a moment, the weight of the general's words sinking in. Humanity's relentless will had already proven itself in battle. They fought not just to survive, but to win. And the Empire, for all its strength, had underestimated that resolve. We'll need to move quickly, Koran said, his tone shifting. He knew the general was right, but admitting it out loud felt like a defeat. Our fleets are scattered, and our supply lines are vulnerable. If we don't consolidate our forces now, we will lose more than territory. We will lose the war. The general nodded. I've already gathered some of the most capable commanders from my defectors. We can coordinate your fleets with a precision the Empire hasn't seen. But we'll need your full cooperation. We can't afford division." Karan's gaze hardened. His pride as an Imperial officer had been his greatest strength, but now it was a liability. He had long believed that the Empire's military was invincible, and the thought of relying on a defector, let alone one who had once been part of the very system he now sought to destroy, was unbearable. But Karan knew that in war, survival came before pride. "Fine," Karan said, his voice sharp. "We will work together. But this is your last chance. If you fail, if your tactics fail, I will take full responsibility for the failure of this alliance." The general's lips twitched slightly, but he said nothing. It was a small concession, but it was enough. They would work together, not as allies by choice, but by necessity. In the days that followed, the reluctant alliance began to take shape. Karan's fleet was brought into line with the general's tactical expertise, a blending of imperial firepower with the general's unorthodox methods. The human threat was too great to ignore, and so, for the first time, imperial forces fought alongside the very man they had once exiled. The blend of military prowess was evident from the start. Karan's ships, still formidable but now more strategic, began to move with an unfamiliar precision. Meanwhile, the general's followers provided key insights into human tactics that would have otherwise taken the Empire years to fully comprehend. However, the alliance was fragile. There were Imperial officers who still saw the general as a traitor, as someone who had abandoned the Empire in its time of need. Their distrust was palpable, and there were moments when Karan had to intervene to prevent tensions from escalating into violence. Yet, despite the friction, the new approach began to yield results. The human forces that had once cut through the Empire's defenses with ease were now facing resistance, and for the first time in weeks, Karan felt a glimmer of hope. "We can stop them," the general said one evening as they watched the holographic map of the galaxy. "But it will take everything we have. If we do not break their momentum now, we will never regain control." Karan glanced at the general, his eyes narrowing as the weight of the situation settled in. For the first time, he saw the man not as a traitor, but as someone who understood the stakes in a way that few others could. As the alliance began to solidify, Karan realized that the greatest challenge would not come from humanity. It would come from within the Empire itself. The question was no longer whether they could defeat the humans, but whether they could come together long enough to stand a chance. The cold void of space was no place for hesitation. Yet, as Karan stared at the view from the bridge of his flagship, his mind was filled with nothing but doubt. The final battle was upon them, and despite the alliance with the exiled general, it felt as though the Empire had already lost. Humanity had already proven itself a force beyond their expectations, and now it was time to face the inevitable. The fleet had gathered. Imperial warships, sleek and deadly, now moved in formation under Karan's command, but the atmosphere was tense. The uneasy alliance with the general had provided brief moments of hope, but as the human fleet advanced, there was a chilling certainty in the air. Karan had seen many battles, but nothing felt as hopeless as this one. The human forces, once a scattered collection of primitive nations, had become a terrifyingly unified force, efficient, calculating, and ruthless. Their ships were smaller but faster, their technology refined to perfection. The Imperial fleet was bigger, stronger, but outnumbered and outmaneuvered. And in the far distance, humanity's most powerful weapon, something Karan could never have imagined, was poised to strike. "We're approaching their staging area," one of Karan's officers reported, his voice strained. "The humans are waiting for us." Karan's hands tightened around the armrests of his chair. He could feel the gravity of the moment pressing down on him. The Empire had never faced an enemy like this, and yet, here they were. "Prepare the fleet," Karan ordered, his voice steady despite the storm raging in his mind. "We will engage them head-on." The general stood at his side, watching the unfolding battle from the tactical station. His expression was calm, almost detached, but Karan could sense the tension in the air between them. The general had become an invaluable ally, But in this moment, Koran knew the fate of the Empire, and perhaps of the galaxy, would rest on the decisions they made in the next few minutes. "Are we truly ready?" Koran asked, his voice quieter now. He knew the answer, but he needed to hear it. "Can we defeat them?" The general did not immediately answer. Instead, he surveyed the holographic map of the human fleet. The human forces had arranged themselves in a perfect, almost terrifying, formation, tight, efficient, and unyielding. Their ships were poised, waiting for the first move, but Koran could already see the strategy in their positioning. The humans were not going to engage with brute force. They were going to use precision. "We can hold them off," the general said at last, his voice low. "But only if we play their game. You must think like they do, adapt, anticipate. You've spent too long relying on sheer firepower. Humanity's greatest strength is their unpredictability. They will not fight by the rules, you know." Koran's teeth clenched. He had fought countless enemies, each with their own tactics, but none had ever required him to bend his will so completely. He had always believed in the Empire's strength, its overwhelming power. But against humanity, that power was no longer enough. As the human fleet drew closer, the tension in the room became unbearable. Koran barked orders, his voice sharp. Ships took their positions, weapons charged. And then, the first wave of human vessels began their advance. It wasn't an attack, at least not in the traditional sense. Instead, they darted in and out of a range of Imperial fire, striking where the Empire was weakest, retreating before the Empire's response could even begin to form. It was a tactic the Empire had never encountered: guerrilla warfare in the vastness of space. The human ships struck in waves, fast and unpredictable, never staying in one place long enough for the Empire to retaliate effectively. "We can't keep up with their movements," one of Koran's officers reported, panic creeping into his voice. "They're too fast." Koran's mind raced as he watched the destruction unfold. The Empire's advanced weaponry, designed to obliterate entire fleets, was useless in the face of such unpredictability. The human ships were too agile, too adaptable, and every attack they launched seemed to land where it hurt the most. Imperial forces were reeling, unable to counter effectively. "We're losing control," the officer said, his voice trembling. "We need to pull back." But Koran refused to give in. "No retreat," he ordered, his voice cold. "We fight until the last ship. We cannot afford to lose now." The battle raged on, but with each passing minute, the Empire's hope of victory began to slip further away. Koran knew that the human forces were relentless, but it wasn't just their firepower that made them dangerous. It was their ability to adapt, to outthink their enemy at every turn. As the hours passed, Koran felt the weight of defeat settle upon him. The Empire's once mighty fleet was broken, scattered, and defeated. The humans had not only fought with strength, but with an intelligence and cunning that the Empire had never considered. And now, the question that haunted Koran's every thought was clear: how much longer could the Empire survive? The general's voice interrupted his thoughts. "You fought valiantly, Admiral, but it is clear now. The war is over." The final battle had been lost. Koran stood at the helm of his flagship, watching the devastation unfold across the stars. Imperial ships, once proud symbols of dominance, now drifted, broken and burning in the wake of humanity's relentless assault. In the distance, the human fleet remained intact, their victory absolute. The Empire had fought with everything it had, but in the end, humanity's ingenuity had proven far superior. There was no turning back. The once mighty Imperial fleet had crumbled, its shattered remnants drifting in the cold expanse of space like forgotten relics of a bygone era. Koran's flagship was one of the last vessels still operational, but even it was on the brink of collapse. His crew, loyal to the end, had fought valiantly, but there was no mistaking the truth. The Empire had fallen. As Koran stared out at the wreckage of his fleet, the silent chaos of the battlefield stretching before him, he could feel the weight of his failure. The humans had been underestimated by the Empire, by himself, and by everyone who had once believed that nothing could challenge their dominance. But in the end, it was humanity's resolve, their unwavering belief that they could win, that had brought down the mightiest empire in the galaxy. Beside him, the general, once a defector and now an ally, stood silently, watching the remnants of the empire's power slowly vanish into the void. He had been right all along. Humanity had not only adapted to the empire's methods, they had surpassed them. "You were right," Coron said, his voice barely more than a whisper. "We never stood a chance." The general did not respond immediately. His gaze was fixed on the distant human fleet, now moving to consolidate their victory. There was no celebration, no triumph, just quiet efficiency as humanity set about securing its newfound control of the galaxy. "You fought well, Admiral," the general said quietly, his voice devoid of malice. But the empire was built on the premise that it could crush anything that stood in its way. You never understood what made humanity dangerous. Now you see. Coron felt a pang of bitter regret. He had been one of the empire's greatest tacticians, but even he had failed to see the growing strength of humanity. Their adaptability, their refusal to accept defeat, had overwhelmed everything the empire had relied upon. It was no longer a matter of power or technology. It was a matter of will. "We will rebuild," Coron said, more to himself than to the general. "We'll find a way to recover." But the general shook his head. "No, Admiral. There is no rebuilding. The empire is finished. Humanity has risen. They will rule this galaxy now." Coron's eyes narrowed, his pride as an officer stirring within him. "And what of us? What happens to the survivors? Will we be crushed like all the others?" The general's expression softened, but there was no mercy in his eyes. "Humanity will not destroy you, Admiral. They don't need to. They've already won. The Empire's defeat is not about annihilation. It's about replacing you. Your time has passed." Coron turned away from the view, his fists clenching. He could feel the weight of the general's words, a truth he had feared but never fully acknowledged. The galaxy was changing, and there was nothing left for the Empire to hold on to. The once unquestioned rule of the Imperial fleet had come to an end, and there was no going back. "You don't understand," Coron said, his voice sharp. "The Empire might fall, but we won't be forgotten. We'll fight on. We'll find a way to." The general interrupted him, his voice firm. "No, Admiral. It's over. Humanity is not like us. They will not let you rebuild what you lost. They won't give you the time. They are driven by something far stronger than power. They will forge a new future, and you will have no place in it." Coron turned back to the view, his eyes now seeing beyond the wreckage of his fleet. The Empire was done, but humanity was only just beginning. He saw their warships advancing, precise and controlled, a force that was not merely conquering, but reshaping everything in its path. For the first time, Coron saw the full scope of humanity's potential. The Empire had underestimated them, dismissed them as insignificant. But now, humanity's victory was undeniable. They had taken everything from the Empire, its fleets, its systems, its pride. And they would not stop there. "They've won," Coron whispered, the words heavy with finality. "And there's nothing left to do but watch them build a new order." The general placed a hand on Coron's shoulder, his grip surprisingly firm. "You fought with honor, Admiral. But your fight is over. Now it's their turn." As the human fleet advanced toward the capital world, Coron knew it was true. The galaxy had been irrevocably changed. The Empire had crumbled, its leadership destroyed, its military defeated. But humanity would rise to fill the void. It would lead the galaxy into a new age, one where the Empire's once mighty power would be nothing more than a distant memory. And as the last remnants of Imperial strength flickered and faded, Coron had no choice but to accept it. The galaxy belonged to humanity now. The Empire was no more,